My name is Philip Graham. I'd like to tell you about my biography of Mary Warnock, published by Open Books. If you're over 60 and either a Guardian reader or a listener to Radio 4, you'll probably have heard of Mary Warnock, and you might well want to learn more about her. If you're not, but you are interested in education or the way childless couples can be helped to become fertile, or in euthanasia or assisted dying, or simply in the way a woman could make a name for herself in the second half of the 20th century, not by being beautiful or self-promoted, but just by being very, very clever, then do read my book about her. Mary was unlucky enough to lose her father before she was born. He was a schoolmaster who died of typhoid, leaving her mother 4 months pregnant and with 4 children to bring up. But crucially, her mother had a very wealthy father, a banker, who made sure the family could lead a comfortable life and the children all be privately educated in independent schools. Her mother really preferred her older sister to Mary, and in any case wished Mary had been a boy. But Mary's self-confidence seems to have been in no way dented by the fact that she was fatherless and the wrong gender. Her education was typical of that of an upper middle class girl of that time. The most important thing was that she would marry well. She was tutored at home until she was 9 and then went to St. Swithin's School in Winchester. Her teachers were not greatly interested in her academic progress. They just wanted her and the other girls to be preternaturally good and God-fearing. So as Mary said, we spent an awful lot of time on our knees praying. Fortunately for her, in 1940, this school was thought to be at risk of being bombed by the Germans. So Mary, who was then age 16, was transferred to another, safer school. Prior's Field was run by a headmistress who believed in clever girls getting on, and Mary got on. She won the top scholarship to Lady Margaret Hall, an Oxford college, and went on to get a double first in Greats, the Oxford name for classical studies. Oxford before and after the Second World War was a glamorous place to be, but those unlucky enough to go there during the war, and Mary went there in 1942, had a bleak time. With rationed food and little coal for the fireplace, they were often hungry and cold, as Mary later recalled. There was another more important reason for Mary being miserable in her first year at university. She was repeatedly sexually harassed by one of the Oxford dons, a fellow of a college, a man in his early 50s, over 30 years older than she. During special individual tutorials he gave her, he removed some of her clothing and mauled her around, though he didn't go further. In the diary that she kept throughout her life, she recorded how, over a period of 9 months, she felt deeply guilty, confused, and ashamed by this experience. Eventually, this was stopped, and afterwards, Mary maintained until the end of her life that this man's teaching had been so brilliantly stimulating, it more than compensated for the abuse. Well, one wonders about that. But the fact is that there's really no evidence she suffered later on in her life from this appalling experience. Anyway, during her last 2 years, she had boyfriends, and a few months before she graduated, she met Geoffrey Warnock, an equally brilliant undergraduate philosopher. They married, and while, as we shall see, she went on to a career as a celebrated public figure, he became first principal of Hertford College and then Vice-Chancellor of the University of Oxford. As soon as she graduated, Mary was made a Fellow of St Hugh's College, Oxford, then a single-sex establishment staffed by women for whom it was their home. Rivalries and college politics prevailed, but Mary kept well clear of all that. Instead, she concentrated on teaching, thinking, and writing a much-praised book about ethics. She also wrote a great deal about existentialism. She found Jean-Paul Sartre an exasperating mixture. Despite the obscure way he expressed himself, he tackled serious subjects like sex and relationships and the way people made decisions in ways British philosophers avoided. As her writing made clear, she was both attracted and repelled by him. After 16 years as an Oxford Don, Mary decided she wanted to play a wider role in the world. She gave up university teaching and was appointed headmistress of Oxford High School, an independent girls' school. She was excellent in this job, especially in the promotion of music education, herself learning to play the horn when there was no one else to play it in the school orchestra. She was particularly caring to a number of students whose family circumstances meant they were poorly looked after, sometimes taking them into her own home, where by now she had 5 children of her own. How did she manage? Well, fitting it all in is the title of one of my chapters. The second half of the 20th century was remarkable for the increase in opportunities it gave to professional women to advance their careers, especially in teaching, politics, medicine, and the law. These improvements are described in my book. Gender equality was by no means achieved, but the gap was greatly narrowed. This can in no way be credited to Margaret Thatcher, our first female prime minister, who Mary came to loathe, a sentiment at least to some degree reciprocated. After leaving the Oxford High School after 6 years in 1972, Mary continued to write philosophical books, Imagination and Memory being the most notable of them. But soon she was being asked to take on major roles in public life. In 1974, she was asked to chair a committee of inquiry into the education of children with special needs. I was a member of this committee, and through it we became friends, occasionally lunching together and corresponding. The report that the committee produced in 1978, and which Mary wrote, was responsible for very considerable changes in the system of special education. It completely changed the way children needing special education were assessed, gave them a guaranteed right to provision, insisted on the need to identify children with special needs as soon as possible after birth, and recommended that because so many children with special needs were educated in mainstream schools, all teachers, not just those in special schools, should be trained to educate them. Parents were to be seen as partners of teachers rather than, had, as so often been the case, their enemies. The report was widely praised at the time, but went through a period of unpopularity in the early years of this century because it was wrongly seen as having recommended the closure of all special schools. It had certainly not. One sentence in it stated, "We are in no doubt whatever that special schools will continue to feature prominently in the range of provision for children with special educational needs." But Mary encountered great hostility. In a vicious article in the Mail headed, quote, "A monstrous ego who has destroyed so much of our moral and social heritage," Melanie Phillips, who'd clearly not read the report, accused Mary of creating a classroom revolution, one which has caused chaos and misery for countless thousands of children and their teachers and made many schools all but ungovernable. That was nonsense. And the criticisms blew over. And in 2018, 40 years after the report came out, it was celebrated by those in the field of special education as having made a massive positive difference to the education of children with special needs, not just in Britain, but abroad too. Then in 1982, Mary was asked to chair another important committee, the Human Fertilization and Embryology Committee, this time looking into the regulation of human embryos and research and the way services for infertile couples needing medical help to conceive should be organized. Again, the committee made wide-ranging recommendations which have stood the test of time. It was agreed, for example, that no research should be permitted on embryos more than 14 days old. Again, the recommendations of this report have stood the test of time and been widely copied internationally. In 1984, Mary was appointed to be mistress of Girton College, Cambridge. She had a mixed time there, afterwards admitting she'd not been happy. The fellows, many of whom I interviewed for this book, liked her and were impressed by her, but sometimes find her rather remote. Perhaps by this time she was becoming rather deaf and even more short-sighted. but she represented the college well at university committees, was popular with the undergraduates, and had some significant success in fundraising for the college. Not long after her appointment to Girton, she was made a life peer. After she left Girton, she was an active member of the House of Lords, making speeches on subjects with which she was familiar, such as education and fertility. Geoffrey died in 1995 after a long, distressing illness, and afterwards, Mary became a somewhat unpopular advocate for euthanasia, for people being helped to die, not just when they had terminal illnesses, but when they felt themselves to be a burden or had dementia. This did not go down well, but she persisted. As many of you will know, the assisted dying debate continues. Mary is no more. She died in April 2019, but her views, expressed extremely cogently, as you would expect from a trained philosopher, are still worth reading about. I hope I've done them justice in my book. Mary was an atheist. She loved the Anglican liturgy, sacred music, and church architecture. She described herself as an Anglican atheist. As such, she didn't believe in an afterlife. But she lives on in this world in her philosophical books and in the influence she had in so many areas of public life. I hope you enjoy reading about her. Thank you.